When it comes to careers, people always think about pay or salary or benefits, but oftentimes you forget about the people who you work with, which can be just as equally as important as your pay and your benefits. If I think about my job I had when I was younger at a retail environment at a grocery store, what kind of kept me at that job for as long as I did was simply just the people I worked with. Likewise, people you work with sometimes can give you an incentive to actually leave your job, or sometimes even your entire career field, depending on who you're working with. So today I wanted to make a video on the topic of dealing with a difficult foreman, specifically in the skilled trades. From my trade I'm in would be the electrician trade. So why are foremen sometimes so grumpy? Well, a lot of the times what causes the general grouchiness of a foreman that you might run into sometimes is all the stress they have from the project that they're working on, being stretched too thin just labor-wise because of not having enough people on their crew that they feel like they would need in order to get the job done within the frame of reference and time frame they have to do it. Being jaded, so maybe they've been in the trade too long without a whole lot of change in their life, and that's kind of caused this jaded or bitter feeling they have from doing maybe the same thing for too long. Personal problems, so maybe they're going through a divorce, maybe they have alcohol issues, maybe they have some drug issues, depression, anger issues, maybe they have some kind of trauma associated with their upbringing. That sounds really dramatic, but unfortunately I have seen that dynamic where maybe a fella has had a rough upbringing with maybe a more controlling, tyrannical father figure in their life. So when they're put in this kind of paternal role as a foreman working with other young apprentice electricians, they might assume their role of their father and kind of take out this weird power dynamic on their crew. Like I said, super dramatic, but I've seen that a couple times. Another reason why foremen might be grumpy or standoffish towards you is because they might be concerned about the competition aspect. I ran into this with a foreman I had for a few years where he didn't want to teach any of the apprentices certain things that he did, such as fire alarm and control wiring on the apartments we were wiring, because he didn't want anybody to learn that skill, because in his mind that is a part of his identity as an electrician, that's a part of his value, and he's not viewing you as a team member, he's viewing you as competition. So all he wants to do is clip your wings and keep you as small as possible, because if you gain more skills, that might make him insecure as you climb the ladder within the trade and maybe one day supersede him within your company or organization or field. So why are foremen allowed to be such a jerk in the first place? What's going on here? Why is it a common thing you might run into? Well, the construction industry or the trades are kind of exempt from the normal behaviors that you might expect at, let's say, a government job or a bank or a school or something like that. I have ran into situations where people that were electricians on my crew got into a fist fight, and then none of them lost their jobs and they were allowed back at work the very next day, except just put on separate crews. So I feel like if you were in a bank and you got into a dispute with some other financial advisor or loan officer and you punch them in the face, I feel like the police would probably be involved, but I don't know. So with just the lack of same kind of HR practices in the construction world, you just have a little bit more rough around the edges crowd. Sometimes permits that kind of aggressive behavior to be acted upon their crew without really any repercussions or anybody keeping them in check about that. Another thing to note as well is, I've used the analogy before, that construction is kind of like a pirate ship. So just like a pirate ship where there's dangerous work and everybody's kind of reliant on each other to be able to get things done in a certain sequence, and that just kind of increases the seriousness and the aggressive tone that people talk to you, because sometimes you're doing something that is dangerous and at the same time on a time constraint. So they're not really talking to you, wanting to consider your feelings, account for maybe some sensitivities you have. They just want to tell it to you straight. This is the deal. Do this. Shut up. So what can you do if you find yourself working with a difficult foreman? All right, so my first piece of advice for you is to always work hard and keep your head down and try to not give them something to complain about. So what I mean by that is that you will have the ethical high ground if you're doing what you need to be doing, given your experience level, given your training level, if you're meeting those expectations that you can do given the tools you have to work with. If somebody is upset with you just because you don't have 5+ years experience yet in the field, that kind of goes on them as long as you're showing up on time, working hard, and giving your best effort. People really can't ask much more than that out of you, especially these days. My second piece of advice is to know your limits and set your boundaries. So hopefully you set your boundaries and know your limits before you blow up on somebody. So that's the idea, is that everybody has a breaking point. Maybe some people think they don't, but I personally believe everybody has a breaking point as far as what they can handle, or as far as getting bullied or pushed around, something along those lines. And make sure you're conscious of your limit. And if somebody says something to you that makes you feel uncomfortable, even if it is your boss, stand your ground and tell them, hey, you can't talk to me that way. Doesn't mean you have to get violent, doesn't mean you have to raise your voice, doesn't mean you have to insult them, but set those boundaries, because you're still a human being. You're entitled to be treated with respect, and you're not a piece of equipment, you're not a tool, you're not a slave that gets to be bossed around by somebody. So if somebody is treating you like that, you need to set those boundaries before it gets out of hand and you explode and freak out at them potentially. Third piece of advice is try to keep your composure. If somebody is laying into you or yelling at you or whatever, don't give them the satisfaction of letting that emotionally get to you. That will kind of keep the power dynamic with you instead of them, because when somebody's coming at you and they're yelling at you, they want that reaction of you to be hurt or bend the knee or whatever. If you keep your composure and you're calm, that's going to bring the power back to you, because you're saying, I am not letting you in to affect my mood or my life. If you want to be this way, that's your decision. I'm choosing to live my life this way. I'm not letting you get to me. Another piece of advice I have is use their mistreatment of you as a motivator to ascend the hierarchy within your trade, within your field, and then eventually do things your way. So in other words, if you have a problem with how somebody's running their crew, complaining about it probably isn't going to help. You probably can't do a mutiny and overthrow them and replace them with somebody else, like some regime change situation with your foreman. I have seen it happen before, but I wouldn't bank on that happen very often. So the best thing you can do about it is do your time, get to be to the point where you are a foreman, and then when you are a foreman, create a different work culture from the top down, and then use that as an example of what you think a crew should be ran by, how the trade should work, how an organization should operate. Once you are a foreman and you remember all the different things you didn't like about foremans you worked for, that is truly the only way to make a difference, is you have to ascend that ladder and make the changes as a foreman. Something I want to part with you with is something that my friend Juan was talking to me about, and he was saying that there's going to be assholes everywhere at every job that you work. Sometimes if you quit a job just because you don't like working with somebody, it creates this grass is always greener effect, where when you go into the next job, guess what? There's going to be another asshole there as well. So a lot of the times, the strategy of just leaving or quitting or running away from people that are very difficult to work with, especially in the trades, is not a good strategy, because unfortunately they're everywhere. I would leave the option to pull the plug as your very last resort. If you're having troubles with depression or mental health problems, or it's something really bad and you've tried to sound the alarm, you've tried to set your boundaries, you've tried all the different steps I just listed and it still hasn't worked, then maybe for the sake of self-preservation you should leave. But in general, I think it's better to develop skills to deal with difficult people with patience and grace, and internalize that and use that to motivate you to take their place someday and push them out of the way, just leading by example. I would say that is a better piece of advice than just quitting. All right, that's it everyone. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.